All right, welcome to Monday Night Bible Study. You are now free to think. As we go into Genesis chapter 4 tonight, raising Cain, we'll be talking about the first two children born into the human race, brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain, Adam and Eve's firstborn, and his younger brother Abel, and we know the story. We'll look at some details about that tonight and some things as we go through this chapter. A couple of main points we want to look at through this chapter. Don't really want to break this chapter into two studies, so we'll try to make it all the way through this chapter tonight because it's a continuous kind of narrative and all fits in together. We do. If we don't have to. We can come back to the other part next week. But before we start, a lot of times I forget to do this. Anybody have any like a question or topic or anything that is on your mind or want to talk about or related to what we've been going over in our study in Genesis or anything? And if you maybe do, you can't think of it right now. Well, remember we can get to it at the end of the study during our discussion time. So let's get straight into the word here. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. The name Cain, or Cain actually in the Hebrew, is basically, that's what it means. I've gotten a man, a human being, as a possession from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And we can, see here that there's a space of time here involved between the time they were born and the time they grew up. So there are several years here of some details that we really don't have. Don't know really anything about, Cain and Abel, their growing up or their childhood or any of that. So, there are a lot of things, really details that are left out in this early account. And there's kind of a logical reason for that. Number one, a lot of those, day-to-day details aren't important. And here's another one of those Bible study principles that we need to keep in mind. Whenever we're reading a part of the Bible that basically is a historical narrative, like this is giving us a history of what happened, when it happened, who was involved, and so forth. Basically the 4 W's. Who, what, when, and where. Remember, those are kind of one of our fundamentals that we want to always apply to Bible study, the 4 W's. Who, what, when, and where. This basically gives us that information. When we're looking at a part of the Bible that is a historical narrative, if it doesn't give details of certain parts of it that we might be curious about, there's a reason why, and it's because those things aren't important to the narrative. And when it just gives a basic rundown like this of what happened and who was involved and so forth, that's because it's going somewhere. There's a point to it. It's like, have you ever told a story to illustrate something? You don't give all the details, you don't want to, you get bogged down in all those details because they're not important. And when that happens, it's one of those rhetorical things. It's going somewhere. So that's why here in this early historical accounts, a lot of the details aren't added in because the story's going somewhere. But anyway, we find Cain and Abel, and here they're born. Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Now we saw last week, God had told Adam, because of your sin, you're going to have to go out and till the ground. It's going to be thorns and all that kind of stuff. You'll eat bread by the sweat of your brow and so forth, and everything. The ground was cursed. But anyway, 2 brothers, different. One raises animals, the other one raises crops. He's basically a farmer. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. All right, now, if you're like me, and if well, most of us been in church forever, you've heard all kind of stories and all kind of things about why God didn't accept Cain's offering. I bet if everybody wanted to say, we could all say we've heard some different reason why God didn't accept Cain's offering. So if you want to throw out an answer, why do you think God didn't accept Cain's offering? A lot of times we hear, well, Abel offered of the firstlings of his flock. It was a blood sacrifice, an animal sacrifice that to God. And Cain, brought the stuff he had raised to God. And we hear, well, that reason why God rejected Cain's offering and accepted Abel's. And there are a lot of other reasons. Now, up until I started, going back over this and studying this again for this study, I had never seen this. It's right here. It's right here. The reason why God didn't accept Cain's offering. Okay, it's because the ground was cursed. That's the reason why. God wasn't going to accept an offering from ground that was cursed. And so we see part of Cain's attitude was he knew what had happened. Knew what happened in the garden. He knew the whole story about Adam and Eve. He knew that God had said to Adam, his father, the ground is cursed because of you, and so forth. Thorns and all that kind of stuff. Well, Cain apparently had that attitude that, well, that may have been for him, but that's not going to apply to me. You know what? And maybe when Cain went out there and he began to farm and till the ground, maybe it produced pretty good for him. Maybe the degree of the curse, maybe it didn't hit him quite like it did Adam. But see, if that was the case, here's one thing Cain wasn't thinking about. See, he didn't know how it would have been had the curse not come on the ground. Had the curse not come, it would have probably been very easy. I mean, the fruit and the grains and all that stuff may have just basically grown on their own. And they may have had to just go out there, maybe, tend to it or prune it or something, Very easily manage these things all over the world and wherever these things grew. And it wouldn't have been hard labor or, frustrating toil and worrying about, man, if I plant this crop, is it going to come up? Are we going to have anything to eat? None of that would have been there before the curse. So Cain doesn't know what it would have been like. And apparently he's thinking, well, that might have applied to Dad and what he did, and the curse, but not to me, because look at the stuff I grew and all that kind of stuff. Whether that was the case or not, we know that Cain had a very prideful attitude. We saw that because it says Cain was very wroth and his countenance fell. Now, wroth is different from just anger. I mean, you can be angry and not be wroth. Wroth is like, okay, you get mad and you may be mad, but you don't take action on that anger. Wroth is like, I get mad, I start knocking stuff down and slamming stuff around and all that kind of stuff. It's when you take action, like angry outbursts. That's what wrath is. And you remember where Paul said, be angry and sin not, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Well, this is kind of the same thing. He wasn't saying, don't be angry. He's saying, don't let it go to the point of taking action because of your anger. Well, this is what Cain did. And he did that because, he had pride. I mean, he wouldn't have suffered anything by God not accepting his offering. But he got angry anyway and wroth, and went around with looked like my grandson when he doesn't get his way. Storm up one.
Exactly.
So anyway, that was Cain. But apparently he had a very prideful attitude, because this is what pride causes right here. So, but anyway, yeah, because of hearkening to the voice of your wife and so forth, thou shalt not eat it. Cursed is the ground. This is why. This is why God didn't accept Cain's offering, because the ground was cursed. After the flood, and we'll look at that when we get to the flood account, one of the statements God made to Noah when he made the covenant with Noah was that he said the ground is no longer cursed. So after the flood, the ground wasn't cursed anymore. Now the whole surface of the earth was different and the climate was different, so that curse to prevent man from taking dominion over the earth didn't need to be there anymore, because the way the conditions were after the flood, it would take a lot of work and toil for them to just get by and eat anyway. So anyway, that's why. So if you ever somewhere you get in that discussion or something like that, and somebody's wondering about why didn't God accept Cain's offering, well, you can show them. Just back up to chapter 3 and verse, whatever that verse was, Genesis chapter 3 verse 17. So this is why, because the ground was cursed. God wouldn't accept an offering from cursed ground. Now, Cain received some education and an offer from God. The Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So, God gives him a choice here. He didn't just lower the boom on Cain. He gives him a choice. So look, Cain, if you do what's right, your offering will be accepted. And also that God was telling you, you will be accepted to me, by me. Also notice here that still, even at this time, this is God directly speaking to him. So apparently that's another thing that was different, before the flood and those generations there, just, after Adam. Things were different there, and still, even in spite of the fall, their relationship with God and so forth was different. But anyway, he spoke to Cain. If you do the right thing, you'll be accepted. Your offering will be accepted. You'll be accepted by me. Offering him a good relationship with God, but he gives him a warning. Says, if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. That means it's ready to come in. It's kind of like you ever had a stray dog show up at your house, What do you have to do to get it to stay there? Just feed it once. You got yourself a new dog, And a lot of times if you open the door, they'll come right in. So, but he's warning him about this, that the sin that really, he hasn't gone across the line yet. He still has a chance for redemption to, correct his mistake of his pride and humble himself in offering a proper offering to God. This is it. This is the offer here that God makes to him. And also he gives him this promise. Unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Telling him, look, you're the oldest. You're the firstborn. The blessing will come to you. Because see, here's another thing. We know because we've got the Word of God to read it in. Plus, we're looking back over time, and we know that God had a plan, and that he was going to raise up a people to himself. Through that people, there would be a Redeemer. He would redeem mankind's sin. He would repossess the earth and take dominion over it, so forth. And in a nutshell, that was God's plan, his eternal plan. He was still going to do that. Cain could have had a part in that, and this is the offer to him, that he would have the headship, the rulership, and the inheritance would pass to him over his brother. But we kind of see a Jacob and Esau thing, The oldest brother, like Esau, I don't want that, he didn't want his birthright, despised his inheritance and all those kind of things, and lost it, and so forth. And we remember Esau had not, Isaac and Rebekah, right? Rebekah was Jacob and Esau's mother. Had not Rebekah basically grabbed Jacob's clothes, put them in his hand, and said, "Get out of here, your brother's going to kill you," and sent him off in the desert, Esau would have done like Cain and killed his brother. So anyway, this was God's offer to him and his warning. Let's move on. Pride and self-will are the root of murder. Cain talked with Abel, his brother. It came to pass when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him because of his arrogant pride. Cain's heart and mind were full of arrogant pride. Lying and murder often found together. Somebody that will lie to you will usually steal from you. And somebody that will lie to you and steal from you, they'll kill you. They will. So those things always kind of come hand in hand. What was it Jesus said? The thief comes not but to steal, kill, and destroy. The Lord said unto Cain in verse 9, "Where is Abel thy brother?" And he said, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" So what does that tell you? I mean, this is like, something you get from a teenage kid. Slap their face when they say a smart aleck remark like this, I don't know, my brother's keeper, and he knew, or else he'd murdered him. And he said, and right here, major turning point, major decision to make for Cain. Well, it was too late. He'd already killed his brother. He'd already passed the point. He'd made the wrong decision. And so now, God's going to lower the boom on him. "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." When I was going over this, I was tempted to take a sideline study on this concept right here about innocent blood crying out to God from the ground. I didn't do it because I just didn't want to, get off on a side road on this. But it would be an interesting study to put together this principle that we find in the Bible in the relationship between God the Creator and the very ground, and how that the earth itself responds to its Creator. Remember, Jesus said even the stones would cry out. Boy, now, so this makes you wonder. God keeps accounts. Every drop of innocent blood. We wonder a lot of times, man, we hear about some terrible, horrible crime, some murder, some atrocities committed, like the, ISIS terrorists over there, and all the stuff they're doing to people. Murdering just innocent people. And we think, man, easily, all of us, we may not admit it, but we all think, man, why does God let that happen? We think about it, Well, we got to remember that we don't see things from God's perspective. And listen, the day will come when every drop of innocent blood will be accounted for, one way or another, unless it's, repented of. I still think maybe Cain still could have repented. Don't know what would have happened, but maybe he could have. If he'd have fessed up and asked God for mercy, he might have received it. But he passed that point, and he didn't. But anyway.
Marshall, when you say that, what it says, and he said, "What hast thou done? The case of thy brother's blood crieth to me from the ground."
Mm-hmm.
That means he sees.
Yeah.
Everything.
He knows.
He knows.
It doesn't slip.
You can't hide that fact.
That's right.
Right.
God knows of every drop of innocent blood that has been shed. It does not pass.
There's no cover.
His notice, and unless it's somebody that confessed and repented of their sin, excuse me, it'll be accounted for. because God doesn't forget. And He knows. Even you know, on Judgment Day, Cain will appear before God. And he'll be accountable for that, you know. And, you know, I wonder sometimes, think about the judgment, some of the things Jesus said about, you know, the first to be last and the last first. Wonder, in the judgment, will it start at the last, you know, person and work all the way back to Cain? And this crime, you know, don't know. But anyway, we could speculate on that all night. Bad, whichever way. Cain chose to go Satan's way. 1 John 3, John used him as a reference, as not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. And we find too, remember this, what God said to the serpent, I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. Well, that seed of Satan, that dark spiritual influence, showed up in that first son. That showed up in Cain. That's why John said what he did, who was of that wicked one. That goes all the way back to here. Cain was one of them who was on Satan's side. He was of Satan's seed, not physically born of Satan, but spiritually he was. And bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel, and so forth. So, Cain chose to go Satan's way. Now, source of his pride, and it was a rejection of God's proclamation to Adam. So, let's find out what God then said to Cain. He said, and now art thou cursed from the earth. So, he didn't believe that the curse on the earth affected him or applied to him. So now, not only that, but he's cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength, taking away, apparently, that which was the source of Cain's pride, his ability to produce fruit from the ground. That's why he was proud of it. That's why he took it to God, made an offering to God. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. Remember that statement, because that factors importantly, prominently in here in a couple of verses that we're going to see. This is God's pronouncement on him. God didn't just kill him. He didn't, lower the boom of judgment on him then. He let him live, but this was his punishment and so forth. So, let's read this. Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Now, there's some interesting things here, kind of some enigmatic things here. Cain, he says, my punishment's greater than I can bear. Didn't think he could stand it. And he didn't really think he deserved it, apparently. Drew me out this day from the face of the earth, and so forth. Fugitive and vagabond I'll be in the earth. And then he says this, it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. For some reason, Cain apparently believed that revenge would surely come upon him. Now, maybe there's some things that happened behind the scene that we don't know about. Maybe, and I get the sense that it didn't, but it could be, maybe Adam and Eve knew what had happened so far. They were angry. Maybe Adam had, said something to Cain. He'd, take revenge on him. Probably not, but it could be. We know that Adam and Eve had other, children, apparently not by this time, because Seth will be the next one in line that will be born. But anticipating that there would be other people born who would be his relatives, he was afraid of revenge being taken. The Lord told him, whoever slays Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. So God put in a deterrent here that a sevenfold punishment would come on them, 7 times worse on anybody that took revenge on Cain and killed him. So he set a mark on him so people could identify him, and a mark, as this mark had to be some kind of reminder of God's protection over him. There's a reason why, and I don't know if I want to talk about this reason now or wait for a couple more. I think I'll move on to some more verses in the chapter, and we'll get some understanding. Have you ever read this and wondered, why did God protect Cain? Why did he set this mark on him and protect him? There's a reason why. And we'll look at it in just a second. I won't go over it here. We'll look at it in a second. A lot of speculation, what was the mark on Cain? And the older generations taught that that's where black people came from. You've probably heard that. It's not biblical. It's probably not. I don't know of any.
My grandmother reading me the Bible and telling me that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So it's. Yeah, a lot of the older generations kind of believe that. It's no reason biblically to believe that. But anyway, it's just kind of thinking in the past. But anyway, whatever it was, don't know. Doesn't really matter. The people then knew it, and so forth. So let's read on. But anyway, Cain lived in paranoia and rebellion the rest of his life, and this became his legacy. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
So you're saying the people that he was worried about are people that's going to be born.
Going to be born. Yeah.
So you don't think there was other people actually out
No, I think that okay. The details we are given was that Adam and Eve had Cain.
Right.
Then they had Abel. Cain killed Abel, and the next one that's mentioned, well, in fact, right here, no, this is Cain. The next one mentioned is Seth. That was their third son, and there aren't any other births mentioned until after Seth, as far as from Adam and Eve. So apparently it was Cain, Abel, then Seth, and then after Seth, they had. That's when it's given the statement, Adam lived 900 and so many years, and he begat sons and daughters. There's no telling how many they had. I mean, think about it. If a woman had a child every year, if she, let's say their productive period was 700 years long,
twins, couple of triplets.
Twins, triplets, things like that. So there's some really interesting, it gets into like the Fibonacci number series and all that kind of stuff. There's some interesting math, if you're good at math, which I'm not, but there's some interesting math about how rapidly a population can grow from just 2 people in really a short period of time. So.
I always wondered about that, about the people, where they come from.
Yeah.
I just always figured, well, God made 2 people, he could have made more.
They all came from Adam and Eve. Remember, what did Adam call Eve? He called her Eve because she was the mother of all living.
Right.
Every human being descended from Adam and Eve. So they say, well, where did Cain get his wife? It was his sister. He married his sister. They could do that then because, remember, Adam and Eve were genetically perfect. And they carried within them the entire human genome. So, all of the DNA sequence for all human beings, forever was contained in their DNA. So their direct children were so genetically diverse that they could marry and reproduce and not, wind up with problems. So, that's how that happened. That's where Cain got his wife. So look at this. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. Now this is one of these we got to remember going through these early chapters. there are several people in here with the same name, but they're different people. Like this Enoch, this is not the same Enoch that walked with God. God took him because he, was righteous and so forth. And there are several that are same name, different people. Bear Enoch, and he builded a city. Wait a minute. He built a city? What had God said? A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. So what's the first thing Cain does? He goes out here and builds a city. Now, if you're going to be a vagabond and a wanderer in the earth and a fugitive, you're not going to go out there and build a city. So here we see still, he didn't care what God said. He was going to take action to directly contradict what God had said about him. So he went out and established, built a city, and so forth. And also in ancient times, the reason they built cities was, well, for protection, because I believe Cain was paranoid all of his life. But also, they built a city for control, because if you had like a area where there was a resource, a water source, a farming area, whatever, as soon as you had enough people, and usually these cities were built and occupied by tribes of people, family units, and increasing family units. So this wasn't a city, not like Dallas. I mean, it was a city like we think of in ancient times, but still it probably grew to fairly good size. Unto Enoch was born Irad. Irad beget Mahujael, and Mahujael beget Methusael, and Methusael beget Lamech. Now, I didn't look up the meanings of all these names. I probably should have, because they're really interesting, and they were significant back in those days, and they had something to do with God, or God's power, creator, or something like that, different things. But and you notice even Cain, he is naming his sons these things that have something to do with God, even at that point. Now, this is interesting. A technological industrial society had developed by the 5th generation from Adam. And Lamech, and remember this Lamech, this is not Noah's father Lamech, this is a different Lamech. Lamech took unto him 2 wives, the name of the one was Ada, the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal, he was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, he was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naomi. Now, a couple of questions here. In verse 20, it says, Ada bare Jabal, he was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. All right, now, commonly, we believe, most of us do, most younger creationists believe, because the Bible states in the original creation, God gave everything plants to eat, and nothing ate meat. People didn't eat meat until after the flood. This raises a question, though. Now, maybe they weren't supposed to eat meat. Why would you keep cattle if you didn't eat meat? What would be the purpose of keeping cattle if you didn't eat the meat? You can't milk,
Clothing, maybe?
maybe. I mean, for their skins, but there could be reasons.
Yeah.
Could be for the milk, could be for the skins or something like that. But more than likely, it's because they were eating the meat. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. It's an interesting number of artifacts that have been found from, what archaeologists believe are some of the oldest human artifacts known. And they're musical instruments. In fact, very interesting musical instrument, a bone flute, was found in, I think, one of the Neanderthal sites, excavation in southern Germany. And this bone flute was made in such a way that it has the exact same musical notes, octaves, whatever you call them on a flute, that a modern day flute has. It produced the same musical tones, scale, I think is what they call it. It's the same musical scale and things like that. So musical instruments go all the way back here. Even before the flood, they had harp, so they understood, stringed instruments, and the organ, and that wasn't like organ like we think of as an organ. That would have been something like a wind instrument, what we would think of as a wind type instrument. There's something else. Zillah, she also bare Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Wait a minute. Now, we've been, kind of given the impression that the people even before the flood, they were basically, animal skin wearing cavemen going around with a club in their hand. But this says they were proficient in the manufacture of brass and iron. Now, let's say that all of us in this group, we were on a plane or a boat and we crashed on some uncharted desert island. How many of you in here would know how to smelt iron or brass? I doubt that with all of us in here, we could probably figure it out. If we had the raw materials, eventually we could probably figure it out. I don't know how to do that. It's complicated to smelt brass and iron. Iron's not that hard. If you got good high quality ore, you bloom it down and all that kind of stuff. But it takes a lot to know how to do this. Now, notice it says that he was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Doesn't say he was the inventor of it. It says he was an instructor. So it had to have already existed before him for him to have learned it and then instructed everybody in it. So it didn't take long from, down from Adam and Eve to where they knew how to make metal objects, brass and iron and copper and those kind of things. So this shows us that before the flood, before the flood, they had a very sophisticated industrial society, culture. Now, one of the other things they would have to have had in order to have metalworking industry was an agricultural production level, so that these people could spend their time out there working in brass and iron. They did not have to go out there and scrounge around for their food every day. They weren't out, walking around with a club in their hand trying to, kill an ox or something to drag it home to the cave and eat raw meat. They had a very sophisticated culture where people were producing the food, these people were producing the trade goods. And this is just in the brass and iron. If they had other stuff too, gold, silver, may have had glass, we don't know, because most of it's been destroyed. But here's the important thing about this statement. The Bible says that before the flood, they were proficient in metalworking. Secular science, even archaeology, claims that they weren't. They were cavemen, back that far and so forth. The Bible counters the evolutionary view of ancient historical age divisions, which are basically this. This is kind of a rough setup, rough year estimate of the age divisions. But this, if you look in, archaeological stuff, they'll basically follow this. Paleolithic, which is old Stone Age, cavemen with clubs in their hand and killing stuff with spears and so forth. Neolithic, still basically Stone Age, but they began to live in cities. They began to raise crops and start of trade and things like that. Chalcolithic is basically the same as Neolithic, except they began to learn how to work metals. They had copper and starting to kind of learn bronze and stuff. But basically, Chalcolithic, copper stone age, basically. Then, early Bronze Age, 3000 BC, where you had, beginnings of Sumeria, Acadia, Babylon, ancient Egypt, those cultures working in bronze trade and so forth. The Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age. Middle Bronze Age, this is about Abraham, somewhere middle to late Bronze Age in there. Abraham's time. Late Bronze Age, this was Joshua, the Exodus and conquest and so forth. And then, around David's time, they consider the Iron Age. But wait a minute. The Bible says that they were working iron all the way back there before the flood. So, and we use this, and, archaeologists that we know and talking about these things, we use these ages too. They don't coincide with the Bible, and we have had some opportunities to point that out and so forth. But go ahead.
I have a question on the time frame. How do they know to go back negative numbers compared to what we're at now? You start out with 3,000, then 2,500, then 2,000.
You can.
Why did they go with that?
You can find accurate historical accounts back to around 1000 BC, maybe a little older, but back, you can get accurate dates, like back to probably the Iron Age, around 1000 BC. Written historical accounts. King so-and-so conquered this city so many years and so many years after this. And you can trace that back and get an accurate date back to about 1000 BC. And then from there, it's, okay, putting these ages together is like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, when you excavate a city in one area and you find certain pottery that can be identified with a certain time frame, and you find that same pottery in a same level in other cities, that gives you a date, or other artifacts by the type of pottery, the markings on the pottery, or it will have like the king's name stamped in the pottery, or you'll find an ostraca with a name, scratched on it or engraved in it, something like that. So you piece these things together and you get a picture of who was where, what happened, and pretty closely when. So that's how they set these ages, and it had to do with trade, technology, and different things like that. And there are two basic sets of ancient letters found on clay tablets. One of them is the Amarna letters found in Egypt. The other one is the Ebla, the clay tablets found at Ebla. And what these were like day-to-day civic documents, or there were letters from one king to another king. And these letters have names and places and dates on them, and there are thousands of them. And so all they have to do is just interpret them. They're written in like either Egyptian hieroglyphics, or most of them are written in cuneiform. Which, you know what cuneiform is? That Babylonian, it looks like they did everything with kind of a wedge-shaped instrument that they stuck in the mud and made marks. Now, a letter might look like something like that, and that would be a letter in cuneiform. And then you can take these wedge-shaped marks and put them in different configurations, and that made it their alphabet. So anyway, by putting all those things together, we really do have an amazingly accurate picture of what happened in the Middle East and North Africa and Asia, all the way back to the early Bronze Age. You know, now the early Bronze Age was shortly after the flood. So one of the things about the early Bronze Age, this was during the time when you had all over the world an explosion of sophisticated cultures who knew how to build huge structures out of massive stones. Then they appeared all of a sudden, almost as though the entire population of the earth was concentrated in one place, and then for some reason they all just scattered all over the earth all of a sudden. Let's see, where have we read that before? Oh yeah, after the Tower of Babel. So there's archaeological evidence that supports that. So anyway, did that answer your
Yeah, what was that called again?
cuneiform? Cuneiform. I think that's how you spell it. And it's actually not hard language to learn and read. You know, I mean, if you study it, I don't know any of it, but those that do, I mean, they can just read it. You know, it's pretty amazing. Which also gives us an idea of all the way back to 2500, 3000 BC. They had very sophisticated alphabetical systems and systems of writing, written language. But point being, are we going to believe the biblical account, or are we going to believe secular science? As good as archaeology is, and I love archaeology, I'm interested in it, I love to read about it. It gives us amazing insight into the Bible and into history and so forth, but archaeology cannot answer all the questions. There are vast blanks that it cannot answer, and it will never be able to answer all the questions, because we'll never be able to excavate everything. All right, so here, does these look familiar? Anybody ever seen these before? These, we believe, are pre-flood man-made artifacts. This stone and hammer, you saw at the Creation Evidence Museum. I can remember seeing this thing back in the early 90s. When first time I went over there to the museum, it wasn't in the building it is now, it was in that other little building out there. And seeing that thing, I can remember just standing there being amazed, at that, because I'd always wondered, are there anywhere in the world, does anybody find anything that apparently is a artifact of the cultures of the pre-flood world? Well, here's an iron hammer with a petrified wooden handle in it that was found in this Cretaceous limestone in this rocky concretion. And the reason the seashell is here, this fossil shell chunk of rock here that it's in was found in the same part of the same rock that the hammer was found in. So it wasn't like this thing was thrown in a hole and cement poured in over it sometime, because fossil shells were found in there, and it's the same matrix like the surrounding rock. This hammer is made of an alloy that they say would be very difficult to duplicate today. It's like 96% iron, 2% sulfur, and 2% chlorine. Metallurgists have studied that and claimed that it would be hard to duplicate in the present Earth's atmosphere. But here's something, some people in near London, Texas were fishing, and they noticed this piece of wood sticking out of this rock. So they either had some tools with them, I don't remember all the details of the story, but anyway, they dug this chunk of rock out and they cracked it open. Here's this hammer in here. And so it finally wound its way up to at the museum. And it's been tested and all kinds of stuff. Now, then over here is this iron pot that was found in a chunk of coal. In 1912, a guy was working at I think it was a power plant, somewhere in Oklahoma, I don't remember the name of the city. Shoveling coal or something, doing something with the coal. There's this big chunk of coal. And so he hit it with a hammer or dropped it or something, it cracked open, and when it cracked open, this iron pot rolled out of it. And so he, of course, kept it, and I don't remember what the story is of where it was from 1912 to how it finally wound up in the museum. But anyway, it was kept as an artifact, and I think the two halves of the chunk of coal till they finally crumbled and fell apart or something. But anyway, unmistakable man-made iron pot, it was in this chunk of coal. And it's an amazing thing if you wanted to look at some of this stuff, just go on the computer, you can Google like man-made objects in coal, and it'll come up with this long list of stuff. Gold chain a lady found in a chunk of coal, and stuff for hundreds of years they've been finding man-made objects in chunks of coal or buried in rock or something like that. So it begs the question, how did the stuff get there? You know, like there's stories in there drilling a well 300 feet deep, and the stuff that comes out of, they pull up like a clay figurine doll or coins and stuff like that, you know, that with a language on it that never been seen before, nobody can decipher. Stuff like that that don't make sense. How did it get there? How did it get that deep in the ground unless it was manufactured in ancient times and buried in a worldwide flood? So anyway, as we believe, these are pre-flood man-made artifacts. We give evidence to Noah's flood. Cain had begun what would become an unending exponential cycle of violence driven by revenge. Payback was one reason why the earth became filled with violence and murder from creation to the flood. Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Here's the reason why Cain was afraid. He said, anybody that finds me will kill me. He was afraid revenge was going to come on him for killing his brother. That's why God protected him. Then Lamech, he apparently committed murder. He told his two wives, if Cain was, somehow staved off revenge, I think maybe Cain didn't believe God, that God would protect him and not let anybody kill him. One reason why he built a city, to protect him, because he didn't believe God was going to kill him. They knew that Cain was under the, I guess he was deserving of revenge. But he said, if Cain has revenge hanging over him sevenfold, then mine will be 70 and sevenfold. By this point, because remember, this is several generations down, there are a lot of people by now. And they're still all related. So apparently, there was a severe revenge factor at work here. And I think one of the reasons why God protected Cain and didn't let whoever relative would have come up and took vengeance on him for killing, Uncle Abel, God wanted to stop that. Because for some reason, he could see this coming. And this is what happened. A escalating downward spiral of revenge. Kind of like, in those mafia shows, mafia movie, Al Capone and all that. Some, they put out a hit on this mafia guy, they knock him off, and then that mafia guy's people, they come over there and they machine gun a whole bunch of those guys, and then who's left of that gang, they come over here and they start, so it just begins this whole machine gun war, of revenge upon revenge upon revenge. In the Middle East, that's the culture. It's one of the reasons why we see the violence in the Middle East now. It's a culture of revenge. They don't think like we do. I mean, we're not vengeful people, Of course, that's one of the benefits of the constitutional system of law that we live under. I know it's not perfect, got some flaws, but still, we know that if somebody commits some overt act against us, we don't have to take revenge on it. We can go to the law and, so forth. So this is what was happening here. Payback and revenge. That's why it de-escalated into this just chaotic mayhem of murder and violence. It all started with Cain. He killed his brother. He was afraid of vengeance. He passed that down to his sons and so forth, Lamech, and it became his culture. So that's why that was. That's why God protected him and so forth, trying to counteract this revenge culture that started. So here we go. Here's Seth. Adam knew his wife again. She bare a son, called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son. He called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. We're going to, of course, the last verse of the chapter, but we're going to stop with this statement right here. I'm not going to go into this tonight. But I want you to remember this statement. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord, because this is going to factor very prominently as we get into the next couple of chapters. Very important, and we'll come back to this statement. So, anyway, here we find the third son, Seth, and this begins another division, because Seth would be the father of the faithful line, the righteous line, which would, go this way, while Cain's line was going that way. And we see two divergent lines. We see the line of Cain and now the line of Seth. And the righteous will come through Seth's line, unrighteous through Cain's line. So, we'll stop here. I think that's the last, yeah. All right. Any questions or discussion?
I think it's interesting how God said to Eve, when he said, "What is this that thou hast done?" And then he says to her son,
Yeah.
"What have you done?"
What did you do?
What did you do?
Yeah. What did you do?
That'd be
You know,
scary.
Yeah. And it has to be an opportunity for them to fess up to what they've done, Kind of like a kid. I mean, if they do something wrong, fess up to it, and most time, nothing will happen to them. But you can't get that through to them. And I guess God had a tough time getting it through to us too. So, all right, we'll pick up in chapter 5 next time, and we'll go through kind of some of these, a lot of names and stuff like that, with some interesting things in there to look at. Okay, if there's nothing else, let's pray and we'll be dismissed.